Assalamu alaikum. Let's cook. The Great Dismal Swamp in North Carolina. Actually, the southern part of Virginia also, okay? Part of this swamp is in the southern part of Virginia. Don't want to leave that out. But this is a huge swamp, over 1 million acres, and is a place where freedom seekers went to escape slavery. Okay, it's one of those horrible circumstances in our Black American history that we turned into a situation. They say make lemons out of lemonade. Yeah, that was our people. The Great Dismal Swamp was home to one of the largest and longest lasting Maroon communities in North American history. The Maroons, who were they? The Maroons are former African slaves who were brought to America, to the Caribbean, who were relentless fighters, warriors. They often escaped slavery. They fought the white man and built their own communities and colonies, did their own thing. They were not going for the slavery stuff. So there were Maroon colonies in America, which we're talking about here, the Great Dismal Swamp. There are Maroon colonies in Haiti, Dominican Republic, Guyana, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, St. Vincent, just to name a few, to name some. Now these people, the Maroons, they would take over plantations, kill the white man, set up shop. In America, there were also Maroon colonies in Florida, and we're talking about this one here, which is the biggest one in North Carolina and Virginia border. The largest Maroon community in the USA, largest known, because who knows, maybe it's one that was even bigger. So these black people who lived in this Great Dismal Swamp, they were very relentless, very intelligent, strong people. These people built homes out of the trees on the swamp to keep them safe. They grew their own food. They hunted small game in the swamp. They had to compete with bears and bobcats, alligators, coyotes for small game. And the people who lived outside the swamp, black people who lived outside the swamp, would help them with things that they needed sometimes, like tools and other things to build homes, okay? Because they had connections and a relationship with black people who were outside the swamp, who didn't live in the swamp, okay? Now this Great Dismal Swamp, it was on the journey of the Underground Railroad system. Now the Underground Railroad was a very complex system. As a child, I used to think that the Underground Railroad was just a place. When I used to hear about it, I used to think there were people waiting for a horse to come through, and they would just hop on this railroad type path and get on and go up north. That was burned in my brain when I was a kid, using my imagination. You know what I'm saying? But not that. Okay? Very complex system. The Great Dismal Swamp was part of that. Now also, they also trained our black minds when we were young to believe that the Underground Railroad just strictly means Harriet Tubman. Not at all, not true. We know Harriet Tubman is to the Underground Railroad, we know that, but not true at all. That's not even 10% of the story. Harriet Tubman is one person of the many, many black warriors who helped their people on the Underground Railroad to go to freedom. But for some reason, she's the one that the US government and the white community feels comfortable with us knowing about, to where the Treasury Department stated that they're going to put Harriet Tubman on a $20 bill sometime in the 2030s. That's something for you to think about if you know white people, if you don't believe that there's some new white people that change, you know the mindset of white Americans, you can go down that rabbit hole. Now, people, again, the Great Dismal Swamp was part of the Underground Railroad system. This was a place where they would go, they would hide out temporarily, they would live there before they continued their journey up north. And many of them made this Great Dismal Swamp their long-term home or long-term place that they lived, because some of these people had loved ones and relatives who were slaves at plantations nearby. So even though they were at the Great Dismal Swamp, they weren't slaves anymore. They're getting ready to head up north. They didn't want to leave their peoples. So they would just live on this swamp, doing their thing, doing what they had to do to survive, knowing that their loved one was at a nearby plantation and they can go ahead and talk, find ways to talk to them or communicate with them some kind of way, and just, thinking of ways that they're going to get their people so they can all head further up north. This was a real swamp, people. Unlivable, they would say. Most would say unlivable for human beings. This big swamp full of danger. North Carolina bobcats, bears, coyotes, snakes, alligators. Now, you know the swamp is on water, so imagine the mosquitoes that are there and things like that. And these black people here made an entire community livable at this swamp. They were literally living on water up in trees in certain parts, you know, where the land would rise higher than the water. They were living there, you know. So you could imagine that these were some serious trees there as well. I mean, like huge trees with big stumps and roots, where the roots were so big that they could provide some foundation and people could actually build up into those trees and on those roots. These were different kind of trees than a lot of people may be thinking that they see today at a park or whatever. Huge trees. Now, the reason why these black people were able to live in this swamp, you may be thinking, well, how did they get caught? The white man was scared to death to go in there. Slave catchers knew that if they went into that swamp, they weren't making it out. It was no way that they could survive. No way. But these great black people right here were able to survive. They built cabins, they lived in them. They had gardens where they grew their own food. They hunted small game animals, you know, for nutrition and things like that. The Great Dismal Swamp people, slavery is just part of our history here, you know. These are the stories that the Department of Education would never teach black students about. Never. These are their people. They don't like us to know these things. They don't like us to know that our people were fighters and things like that. Who goes and builds entire communities on a swamp and lives there as normal as they can? These are people who want to be free. They don't want to deal with oppression, Satanism from the white community, the government. And this is the reason why I don't even have conversations with arrogant white supremacists or some of these coconut Klondike type Negroes who know nothing about the history and they want to go ahead and blab their mouth and say things. They don't know anything about what our people went through in America. You know, maybe some of you people listening are descendants of these Maroons of the Great Dismal Swamp, or Maroons, period. You know, this is another one of those stories about our people in history. How could I even be impressed with a white American story? It's almost impossible. Knowing that my people went through something like this, it's impossible for me as a black person in America to be impressed with a white story. You know what I'm saying? Not saying that they don't have their own stories, but it's different levels to it. That's their stories. You know, I don't care if they're a pilgrim or if they came later and landed on Ellis Island from Italy or Ireland or Scotland or wherever. It don't matter. It does not matter. It's impossible. You literally have to dumb a black person down for us to be impressed with these stories about what white immigrants or white Americans did. You know what I'm saying? And they do a good job at dumbing us down, by the way. You know, it's only a matter of time for some of us, and some of us like to stay in that state. You know, these are people who came in on a boat and showed up and they were given a physical and a sandwich, box juice and all that other stuff. And then they have these stories about how hard life was when they got to America. I mean, come on, that's nothing to a black person. You know, and many Europeans came to America just for free land and handouts. You know, the Homestead Act came to America for free land and handouts. The Homestead Act, something that black people were blocked from. It's impossible for me to be impressed about any white stories of resilience and struggle in America. Impossible. Now, people, today you can go visit this Great Dismal Swamp if you would like to. The U.S. Park Service manages it, but you still can't get into some areas in this swamp. I mean, they're just too dangerous. Of course, now it's not in the same condition that it was back in the early 1800s, but it's there. You know, the water is much lower, of course, but you still can't get all the way back. The U.S. Park Services won't even allow that. Too dangerous. But people, get in the comments. Let me know what you know about this right here. Easy.